Welcome to another episode of the Strength Log. My name is Philip Wildenstam. I'm a certified nutrition coach and a co-owner of Strength Log.
And I'm Daniel Richter, CEO of Strength Log and a certified personal trainer. And Philip, how is your running economy these days?
I'm betting it's great.
Yeah, a lot of inflation.
Probably. And arthritis in my knees. That would make running real fun.
Well, you want a decent amount of stiffness in your muscles and tendons. And maybe that goes for your joints as well.
Probably not. This weekend I watched an old documentary. I think it turned 30 years last year. It's very famous. It's called Hoop Dreams. It's about two kids in Chicago, inner city, that wants to become NBA players.
Yeah.
And you get to follow them for like 5 years through high school and their way to college. And one of the guys, he's a really talented player. He has a significant knee injury. And you get to see the operation. And just as a passing note, one of the doctors says, he's going to have a lot more issues with arthritis in the future. So they knew that even back then. That once you operate on a joint, the risk of arthritis just goes through the roof. And I've had surgery on both my knees. So, good for me.
Yeah, but did you get to the NBA?
I was close, man.
Yeah, I bet you were.
I played basketball for 1 year when I was 9.
So we're going to talk about running today.
We are.
Yeah.
This is turning into a Cardio Bunny podcast.
It is. Let's just embrace it. But we're going to talk about the effect of strength training on running. And I mean, yet again, a topic that if you go back, maybe not 1 decade, but at least 2 decades, this was fairly controversial. And I imagine some heated debates were going on amongst runners about whether or not you should do strength training. And if you fast forward to today, it's almost like a certainty in elite level running programs. And it would rather become a point of discussion if there weren't strength training in it. Like, ooh, you're so controversial.
But I still think a lot of like everyday runners are still a bit afraid of strength training because it goes hand in hand with the general population. And you have, I'm going to single out females here. You still have a big group of women out there super afraid of strength training because they don't want to become bulky.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. If you're a runner, you know that if you lose weight, everything feels easier.
Yeah, you will directly improve your performance up to a point.
Up to a point. And thinking about strength training, you do strength training to build muscle mass. And I don't want to weigh more. I don't want to look like a bodybuilder.
Exactly.
But the thing is, it's really, really fucking hard looking like a bodybuilder.
Yeah, especially if you run 4 hours per week.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we're going to get into that issue via today's study. And then we also have the dilemma for, hobby runners or amateur runners that at which point is it beneficial to trade one running session for a strength training session instead?
Of course.
And that's probably at a fairly high frequency. But who knows, man? So we had a request for this episode. In one of the previous episodes, you hinted at this study, that you had glanced upon it, and someone requested that we do a full episode on it. And we are here to serve. So here we are. We're going to talk about a new study that looks into how strength training affects running economy. Because as the authors of this new study writes, it is well established by now that strength training improves running economy. But those studies are mostly done on low to medium intensities. And they also go on to write that we know that towards the end of long races, and they're referring to the marathon in this case, but I think the half marathon would also qualify, running economy starts to deteriorate quickly as runners get tired. Yeah. So if you were to look at a graph of a runner at around like the 60-minute mark, their running economy, meaning how much oxygen they consume to maintain a given pace, so like fuel economy for a car, after say that might be stable for 60 minutes, but around that mark, the running economy starts to get worse and fairly quickly. Probably because of fatigue in the type 1 muscle fibers, the slow twitch ones, and also probably because the glycogen is running out, and that means you have to switch to fat as your main fuel, and fat requires like twice as much oxygen for every calorie you get out of it. So it might be a big storage of energy, all our body fat, but it's not as fast as the glycogen is. We need to lower the pace if we're going to run on fat. So what they wanted to see, the authors of this study, they wanted to see if strength training, if you add that onto a running program, if it helps to maintain running economy at heavy intensities, as they call it, in long races. And also, as a sub-question, they write that races are often finished with a high-intensity sprint or run for maybe a couple of minutes, and they want to see if strength training can improve that performance, so the sprint at the end of a race. So that's what they were going to check out, and they were basing this study out of, well, you go ahead, Philip.
Loughborough.
Loughborough in the UK. I wonder if you got that right.
I don't think so.
Probably not.
The last thing I did before we started recording was listening to the pronunciation guide for Loughborough.
While we're at it, how's that sauce pronounced?
Worcestershire.
Worcestershire. I only heard just Shire.
Some people just say Worcester sauce.
Worcestershire.
Yeah. And don't attack me if I got it slightly wrong. I'm more right than most people.
You're not going to outrun these guys. So what they did was that they rounded up a bunch of well-trained male runners, and that was intentional because there's only been one study looking into running economy. Let's see if I get this right. Strength training in running economy on longer distances, I think it was, and that was in female runners. Or it might have been, there was something unique about it, and there were only females, and they didn't see an effect. So now they wanted to do it with only male runners. And they split this group of runners in half, and well, everyone was told to keep the regular running exercise program going, but for half of the runners, they wanted to add strength training to see how that would affect their performance in a few different tests. But before we get into the tests, let's take a look at the participants. So 38 were recruited, but only 28 completed the 10-week intervention. One dropped out due to injury, but most of them simply dropped out just because they stopped communicating or they didn't show up or, well...
Bastards.
Yeah, really annoying. They had to be between 18 to 45 years. I think most of them were around their 30s. Another criteria to be able to participate was that you had to be able to run a 10K in less than 50 minutes. And the group average was 39 minutes, so they were well clear of that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, that's good. The average VO2 max of the group was 58 milliliters per kilo and minute. And there was also a criteria that they had to be running at least 20K per week, and the average of the group was 45Ks per week. So a lot of running. And also, they mustn't have been engaged in strength training in the previous 6 months before the study. So, the participants were randomly assigned to either an endurance-only training group, meaning that they only continue doing their regular running training, or a strength group which maintained their running training, but they added strength training on top of that. And they added 2 strength training sessions per week for 10 weeks. These sessions were supervised by a qualified strength coach. So that's a strength. A limitation here is that the running wasn't supervised at all. They had some monitoring of it, but not all. But on the other hand, runners, kind of like bodybuilders when they track their diet, runners are pretty meticulous about tracking. So
I believe so too. If you qualified for this group, and which we see these people did, and the average was much better than the limitations set on the group.
Yeah.
These people run.
Yeah, they like details and structure.
Probably.
Okay, so the 2 strength training sessions per week, they consisted of a warm-up, and then they did 2 plyometric exercises. So basically various jumping exercises. They varied between a few different ones, but basically they were all jumping in one way or the other. And they did 3 sets for between 6 to 12 reps of these. And then after the 2 plyo exercises, they always did 3 leg strength exercises. They did a barbell back squat, single leg press, and seated isometric calf raises. So a calf extension exercise where you sit down, and isometric means that you push against a resistance that doesn't move.
Yeah.
3 sets of each of these exercises for low to medium rep numbers, around 5 reps per set for each exercise. And they did a bunch of tests before and after these 10 weeks. They tested their VO2 max and they checked their body composition via DEXA scan. And then they tested their 90-minute running economy at heavy intensity. I'm not sure exactly what heavy intensity is. I think it might be called zone 3. Not sure. But it seemed to be fairly exhausting because, like mentioned earlier, around the 60-minute mark, the running economy in this test before the intervention, the running economy started to get way worse. They started accumulating a lot more blood lactate, and the rate of perceived exertion went up at this point. And then immediately after the 90-minute run at heavy intensity, they did what is called a time to exhaustion test at a speed correlating to 95% of their VO2 max, so close to a max speed at this point. And time to exhaustion simply means that you run until failure.
Yeah.
Which is probably not a super nice thing to do.
No, this is self-torture.
Yeah, and we're going to get into the numbers, but it took them around 2 minutes until they fell off the treadmill, or however you structured those tests. I don't know. I'm just a reader. They also tested their counter movement jump height, which is when you just bend your knees and jump up as high as you can, their strength in the single leg press, and their strength in the single leg calf extension. So lots of tests. And then they did these 10 weeks of maintaining the running, but half of them added these 2 strength training workouts. And then after 10 weeks, they got back into the lab and redid all of the tests. Let's begin with body composition. And this is interesting regarding that discussion we had before in the beginning of the episode. If we look at the group that added strength training, who might have feared that, oh no, we're going to get big and bulky and lose our running skills. That group, they lost 1.1 kilo of fat during these 10 weeks. The group that only kept up the running, they gained 200 grams of fat. The strength training group did gain 700 grams of lean mass, so around half of that is muscle mass, and the other is other stuff. While the endurance-only group, they lost 300 grams of lean mass. So all in all, if we put this together, the group that added strength training, they lost around half a kilo of total body weight over these 10 weeks from adding 1.5 hours of strength training. While the endurance group that only kept on running, they maintained their body weight. So
more or less.
Seems like the fear of weight gain might be overblown.
I always fear weight gain for other reasons. But these are highly active people. They ran on average 45K per week. They did 1.5 hours of strength training, and they saw the strength training group. They saw some great beginner gains from just 1.5 hours. That's cool.
Yeah,
and the other group didn't change much.
Yeah, but I just mean like you obviously don't add like 5 kilos of body weight by adding some strength training.
They even saw some body recomposition. They got some more muscle mass and some reduced fat mass.
Exactly, and I mean, that is extremely valuable in every endurance sport, basically. Yeah. Because you have more engine and less dead weight, so to say. And exactly. The strength training group, they as expected, they got stronger in the leg press and in the calf extension, and they improved their jump height in the counter movement jump. The improvements were around between 7 to 22% increases, while the endurance group that only kept running, they didn't gain anything in the leg press, calf extension, or jump height. But who cares about the strength and their jumping? What about the running? Because they redid the 90-minute run at a heavy intensity, followed by the time to exhaustion sprint at the end. So, in the previous 90-minute running economy test, we saw their oxygen consumption going up sharply after 60 minutes. But after 10 weeks of strength training, they maintained a similar running economy throughout the last 30 minutes when they redid this run at the same pace. They also had lower levels of blood lactate, and they rated their exertion as lower. While the group that only kept up their running, they didn't see any improvement in any of these measurements. So yeah, go strength training.
These results are great.
Yeah, they were able to maintain the same running economy for longer. And then immediately after the 90-minute run, they did the finishing time to exhaustion test at 95% of their previous VO2 max. And before the 10 weeks of strength training, the so-called strength group, they were able to run for an average of 250 seconds on this pace before they, quote-unquote, fell off the treadmill. But after the 10 weeks of strength training, the strength group could stay on for almost 80 seconds longer, 327 seconds. So that's an increase of like 35% or something. While the group that only kept up their running, they got slightly worse over the 10 weeks. They stayed on for 25 seconds less after 10 weeks of additional training. So they dropped like 10%.
Yeah, probably because they gained some fat. Those lousy bastards.
No, they only gained 200 grams. That's within the margin of error.
I know.
No, I see it more as a sign of how most of the time we don't train very hard when we left our own devices and we're on these long plateaus. But yeah, strength training kicked ass in this study. The VO2 max didn't improve for any of the groups, but still they were able to perform much better in these running tests. Better running economy, better endurance at that final sprint. They could keep that high intensity for longer.
You could translate these results to if you are a decent long distance runner and you have a half marathon coming up in like 2 or 3 months, adding 10 weeks of strength training should significantly lower your PR on the half marathon.
Maybe.
Because you're already running it in less than 90 minutes.
But what if they gain 10 kilos of muscle when they add strength training?
Know. Especially female runners, they will just look like Phil Heath, the Mr. Olympia bodybuilder, in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Imagine those goal photos. So the question is, why does this happen? If their VO2 max doesn't improve, why does this happen? And the authors speculate that, so I don't know, I'm definitely not an expert on running, but they write that type 2 fibers, which is typically the strength training muscle fibers, the fast ones that fatigue quickly. They write that the type 2 fibers kick in when the type 1 fibers are fatigued, maybe due to glycogen depletion. And they say that strength training causes type 2X fibers, so that's like a subcategory of type 2 fibers, them to shift into type 2A fibers, which have better endurance. And that is a thing, and this happens. We know this from earlier research. I just don't know if it's established to have this profound of an effect, but hey, maybe. What I take more stock in is the other speculation they have, that these benefits happen because of increased muscle tendon stiffness. And this I got more truck with. I can really see this having an effect because we know. So when we strength train, like it's almost paradoxical, because when we strength train, we tend to get more flexible and increase our mobility. But as at the muscle and tendon level, we actually get more stiffness in the movements that we do. And this stiffness allows us to transfer force better. It's like imagine that you're gonna pull a heavy sled or something, and before strength training, you get to use a rubber band for pulling it. It's soft and it gives away, but after strength training, you get to pull with a stiff rope. It's much more effective at transferring the force. And this happens when we're strength training. It's one of many, many adaptations in our muscles and tendons that allow us to lift more weight, even though we might not have gained much muscle mass. So for a runner, this would mean a better rebound effect or a better elastic effect when we are running. You have a more effective rubber band bouncing you back up after each step. So I think...
So close to sort of like those shoes that came out almost 10 years ago now that significantly improved both sprinting and long distance running by making every step slightly easier for the wearer of those types of shoes.
Yeah, I haven't looked into those. I don't know how they work, but that sounds plausible. Yeah. And then I don't think they mentioned this in the paper, but we do also know that when we strength train, we got a lot of neuromuscular adaptations that also improve our performance in every muscle action. And I think those might have been beneficial as well in this case. And hey, they did gain some lean mass, and that extra muscle mass might have been helpful as well.
I think so too.
Like the way back when this was starting to become a thing, we used to say that, well, if you get stronger legs, that means that every step of your run is going to be done at a slightly lower like intensity level relative to your max. So every step is slightly easier. And I still think that sounds like a reasonable explanation for why strength training might improve performance.
I do too. But the big question remains, do you need to become like a bodybuilder to become a better runner? Mm-hmm. In this study, they focused on lower body, and they only did 45 minutes twice per week.
Yeah.
And we have something similar for free in our strength training app, Strength Log. Yeah. We have a strength training program for runners. And when I look at that, I'm like, oh, this isn't very much.
No.
But it might be exactly what you need if your main focus is long distance running.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just one workout per week would probably go a long way. 2 probably better. But, out of practicality, it gets more difficult.
Yeah.
And I also think about like flipping this for someone who is more into strength and power, but want to like boost their cardio fitness a bit for health reasons or performance reasons. Just in the same vein, just adding 1 or 2 workouts per week for that purpose would probably go a really long way. It would be something that a runner would scoff at, but just as the other way around, adding 1 or 2 strength sessions for a runner probably takes you a long way.
Yeah, I think so too. You just need to stay away from the classic bitten by the iron bug disease.
Exactly.
Like when you start focusing too much on how much you can deadlift or squat or stuff
or
like
bench,
that.
That's even worse.
Yeah.
That's the runner's worst enemy.
No, I think a really good bench press will make you a better finisher of a marathon.
You're going to look better in the goal photos.
No, but you can push your opponents away harder and more aggressive.
You got to be able to break that, tape at the finish line. But yeah, I still think the practicality of it is interesting because, as you said, they added 1.5 hours of strength training, but that's just the training time. With all the getting to the gym and everything, you're probably looking at 3 hours of extra time in time commitment.
Probably.
And that's a possibility of 3 hours of extra running. And I mean, when does the point come that the running benefits? But then you might argue that running performance isn't the only thing important here, because what about all the other benefits they get from strength training? I mean, thicker bones, stronger legs. I mean, it's also an investment in their long-term health and in their all-around fitness, not just to have a bird skeleton and a light body weight.
Yeah, that's a very good argument for adding some upper body work as well. If you're a runner and you run decade after decade.
Yeah, because that is what we have in our running program in the app. There's like a minimum amount of upper body work.
Just to stay in shape.
Yeah.
Just to lay the foundation for a healthy upper body too as you age.
Yeah. And you're probably going to drop some fat if you start strength training. So your body weight might not increase at all. And even if it does, we see in a lot of other running studies where they add strength training that even if they gain a kilo or two, they usually still improve their running performance.
And those are studies on shorter distances, right?
Yeah, I think it's less common to see this type of study, which requires well-trained runners, long distances at high intensity. So it was a fairly cool study. I mean, these were some runner geeks.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Yeah.
It's not going to inspire me to go out running.
No, but it's obviously more important to gain some more leg strength.
Absolutely.
You could add some jumping.
That my knees would love some counter movement jumps.
Yeah.
I would try it on a treadmill just to get off the treadmill.
Jumping.
Yeah.
Yeah, so cool to see this done on well-trained runners, because at my fitness level, which isn't very high if we look at the running part of things, my running kind of feels like strength training for my legs, and my leg training kind of feels like cardio training. So I sense some overlap, but not at this level, obviously.
No, but I know what you mean. When I got back on the exercise bike in the beginning, as soon as I exerted myself, I started breathing heavily and sweating like a pig. Does pigs even sweat?
I'm not sure.
I don't think they do. Anyway,
no offense to the pigs.
It felt more like strength training, but now a couple of months in, it doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say. It feels like cardio. But I've increased my VO2 max by like 2 points in Apple Health.
That is great. It is fun to look at that little meter.
I'm still not over low.
Yeah, I'm also checking that number, and I'm still below average, but I do weigh more than I should weigh from a health perspective at my height. But once I get that 200 kilo squat, I might dip down a bit in body weight again and see if I can get up to average near to max. We'll see. Okay, so nice study. What do we have coming up? We have been talking about how we, over the summer, might do a little voyage or an odyssey among the most useful and most common strength training exercises. So going over the big 4 or big 6 strength training movements, really, or exercises, depending on how you see it. So we might start up that soon.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
We know that podcast listening goes down during the summer, but these would be nice episodes to revisit for our listeners in the future when they want, I really want to focus on the overhead press for a while. Then you can go back and listen to the overhead press episode or the squat episode.
Exactly.
Stuff like that. Evergreen.
So make sure to hit subscribe on this podcast if you want to catch that. And thanks for listening.
Train hard, eat well, die anyway.